A senior Iranian official has told Al Jazeera that Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi is expected to hold talks with U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff in the coming days. The source has told Al Jazeera that those talks will be hosted by Turkiye. Both Tehran and Washington have signaled that they are willing to revive talks and address the tense standoff over Iran's nuclear program. A U.S. strike group remains in the region after Donald Trump threatened military action over Iran's crackdown on anti-government protests. Well, our White House correspondent Kimberly Halkett is in Washington, D.C. Meanwhile, Ali Hashem is in the Iranian capital, Tehran. So, Ali, Kimberly, tell us both what you're learning about the possible format of these talks, and then we'll look at the content. Ali, you start.
Well, the fact that this is a breakthrough in diplomacy, the race between war and diplomacy was very close till the visit by Qatar's Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani to Tehran, a 2-hour visit that resulted in this breakthrough. Now, what we know is that there's going to be direct negotiations between Iran and the United States of America, the first of its kind since 2015 nuclear accords in Vienna. Also, there is going to be a discussion of several issues, mainly roots of this current standoff between the two countries. There's going to be also regional participation in these talks. Now, this is what we understood. And of course, in the past few days, we heard from Iran's the Secretary of the Supreme National Security Council, Mr. Ali Larijani, who said that the framework for this regional dialogue is being built. So now we understand that this dialogue or this negotiations is going to happen. Most probably it's happening in Turkiye. However, regarding timing, there's nothing clear yet.
Okay, Kimberly, on your end, what are you hearing on the format? In other words, who's talking to who, where, when, and any other, protocol-related issues?
Yeah, what the White House has been saying has mostly been coming from the U.S. president. But what we've been hearing behind the scenes and what is being reported is that in terms of the format, it is being orchestrated and worked out right now by outside regional partners of the United States, including Turkey, Egypt, and Qatar. Now, what we also know is that the U.S. president has said that any deal that ultimately is finalized will mean that Iran can have zero nuclear weapons. No nuclear weapons is what he said over the weekend. And to that end, the U.S. president also leaving the prospect of military action still hanging in response to the comments made by the Ayatollah on Sunday about if the United States starts a war, that it would be a regional war. The U.S. president very calmly once again mentioned that the U.S. has a very strong military presence in the Gulf region. And if there's no deal, well, then Iran will find out whether or not that is truly the case.
Ali, the content of these talks is supposed to be what? I mean, what are they supposed to actually be negotiating, if this is even a negotiation?
Well, given the latest developments, given what was almost a war, and the military buildup in the region, it's clear that both Iran and the United States and their allies and partners in the region, mainly the regional order now, is in threat. And that's why regional players were trying as much as they can to kind of uproot the reasons of this standoff or this crisis. This is a conflict that's been going on for the past 47 years between the United States and Iran. And it was developing all the time. Now, President Trump came up with several points that he is asking the Iranians to achieve. At the same time, there are many grievances the Iranians are putting on the table. So what we can analyze here, and it's not based on information, more analysis, is that both countries and the regional players want to see all these points diffused, whereas there is no possibility for another standoff in the near future. That would mean talking the nuclear issue, talking the regional issue, talking the ballistic issue. Will Iran accept all these? It seems for the moment that the Iranians are open to the discussion, to have this discussion. Now, whether this is going to reach a result, it doesn't seem right now that there is a lot of luxury for the Iranians or the Americans not to reach a deal.
Not a lot of wiggle room, you say, not to have a deal. Let's go back to Washington, D.C. Kimberly, the U.S. has a pretty long list of grievances against Iran, certainly if you listen to the U.S. president. You mentioned that Donald Trump wants no nuclear weapons in Iran. Now, I would point out for context to our viewers, the Iranians, if you ask them, they will continue to say at every level of the Iranian state, we are agreed in theory to a deal where we would not have nuclear weapons, but then the devil's in the details, right? So do you have a clear idea, let's not say clear, but do you have even a rough idea at this point of what the Americans might be asking for?
Yeah, and it is pretty clear, to be fair. The U.S. has been pretty firm on about 4 points that it's looking for. No nuclear weapons, as Donald Trump has said repeatedly, but that goes to speak to even for civilian purposes. So no uranium enrichment. It also is asking for, in addition, for there to be no ballistic missile program. And that is going a step further than we've seen, say, years ago in negotiations. We also know that there is a desire for an unprecedented level of monitoring by the IAEA. So this would include snap or surprise inspections as well. And we know that there is a demand for an end to Iran's support for regional proxies. And if there is full compliance with all of this, then the U.S. is dangling the prospect of lifting sanctions that have, we know, been hurting the Iranian economy.
Ali Hashem in Tehran, Kimberly Halkett in Washington, D.C. Thank you very much to both of you. Let's go through that list of demands laid out by the United States one more time, just before we bring in our guest, Ali Vaez. So the list of U.S. demands: 1, reduce Iran's ballistic missile stock and range, especially missiles that can reach Israel. 2, completely halt nuclear enrichment. 3, end financing and backing of armed groups in the region. 4, remove any threat to Israel's security. Ali Vaez is the director of the Iran Project at the International Crisis Group. Ali, you're joining us from Geneva. Great to have you on the program. That's a pretty high bar that is set by the U.S. with that list of demands that we just read. Some of them already rejected by the Iranians. They've said, we are not talking about our missile system. We're not talking about our own ability to defend ourselves with missiles. That's on the list of American demands.
It's good to be with you. That's right. Look, the real question here is whether this is an opening salvo in U.S. negotiating position or whether this is the bottom line of what the U.S. is going to be demanding. If it's the latter, it would amount to Iranian capitulation, and the Iranians have rejected it in the past, and President Trump's first term in office, and every other occasion. Because the only thing that the Iranian regime finds is more perilous than suffering from the effects of another U.S. strike on Iran is actually surrendering to U.S. terms. It would reaffirm that Iran is in a position of weakness, and it would alienate the regime's core constituents, the very small ideological constituency that remains and is willing to fight for this regime.
Iranians don't want to capitulate. They've said that, and I think they've shown that as well. But one assumes that they also don't want to be attacked by the U.S. And there's a very, very credible threat of U.S. military attack right now. I was sitting in this chair only a few days ago when the airspace over Iran was closed and everybody thought it was imminent. So the question is, does Iran feel pressure from the U.S. having its aircraft carrier in the region and having prepositioned all these military assets?
It certainly does. And it wants a deal to try to avert a war, but not at any price. Because again, it does believe that a strike is something that it can absorb and it can survive, because the only thing that poses an existential threat to the regime is a land invasion that is just not on the cards. Whereas loss of credibility, loss of legitimacy, even in the eyes of its own supporters, will be fatal for it. And that is why that I believe that it's not going to agree to full submission to U.S. terms. But by the same token, they also understand that the United States doesn't want war, because you're right, war appeared imminent. But the reason President Trump hesitated, I think, is the realization that there is no low-cost scenario in which he can do a limited strike in Iran and get away with it.
A few weeks ago, this moment of heightened tension in the region started because Donald Trump seemed to be laying down a red line about the way Iran was dealing with its protesters. Let's just remind our viewers that thousands of people have been killed. Even the Iranian state TV recognizes this. Thousands of Iranians have been killed in protests. Of course, there are varying accounts on who killed them and how, but at the end of the day, thousands of people have been gunned down on the streets of Tehran and other Iranian cities. And that's when Donald Trump said, this is a red line. Help is on its way. That's what he wrote on his social media post. Fast forward 2 or 3 weeks, we're not hearing the American president talk about Iranian protesters anymore. It's all about a nuclear deal and Iranian missiles.
Yes, because when he said the U.S. is locked and loaded to go to the rescue of the protesters, the U.S. was not locked and loaded and had limited capacity, given the deployments in the Caribbean, to be able to send enough military assets to the Middle East to sustain a strike on Iran, and also to defend U.S. interests and allies in the region. So now that the military assets have arrived, the military threat is in search of a new objective. And the new objective for the president is to try to use the diplomatic pressure, the economic pressure, and the military pressure on Iran to coerce Iran into submitting to his terms. Again, if he is in search of more realistic objectives, given the fact that the alternative is pretty unattractive for both sides, a deal is possible. Otherwise, a stalemate or a return to the dynamics that you were mentioning before, the risk of a conflict, will be back on the table.
The Iranians will remember that about 7 months ago, in 2025, they were in the middle of negotiations. They were down to the 6th or 7th round of nuclear negotiations with various international players, and that is when they were bombed, first by Israel and then by the United States. And now they see these negotiations possibly as a cover and as a ruse, as an ambush. I mean, do you think that while that window for negotiations opens, there can still be a strike on Iran, or do you think that there is going to be a real attempt at negotiation?
Look, I wouldn't be surprised if next week, this time, President Trump has struck Iran again. Or I wouldn't be surprised if he has struck a deal with Iran. With this president, everything is possible. But the reality is that there is deep mistrust on the Iranian side because of their own experience with President Trump withdrawing from the previously negotiated nuclear agreement in 2018, bombing Iran in the middle of negotiations. But there is also mistrust on the other side. The U.S., there are voices in the U.S. who say that this is a regime on the ropes that is now trying to just buy more time with negotiations. And the political cost of deal-making is also quite high, and it has increased for both sides. If Iran is now to negotiate with a regime that, with an American administration that not only has bombed it, but has now threatened to intervene in its internal affairs, it will be very hard to justify. It would be also hard to justify for President Trump, as much as the laws of political gravity do not apply to him, that he would be willing to grant sanctions relief to a regime that, again, appears to be on the brink of collapse. So it would be hard, but the alternative is harder for both sides.
Ali Vaez of the International Crisis Group, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Don't miss out. Get the full picture. Subscribe to Al Jazeera for reliable news and expert insights. Like, share, stay ahead.